Okay, good morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Good morning. Today is Thursday, April 23rd. Happy birthday, William Shakespeare. We are here in the third of our spring shiurim on Gemara. This semester's subject is Treasures of Talmud, a deep dive into the rabbinic mind on the subject of what does it mean to be human. Last week we took up some sugyot about the ethics of speech, and in a similar or related vein, though we're not continuing sequentially through any particular passage that we examined last week, we will kind of have a complementary lesson today on the ethics surrounding lying and truth and how uh, the hierarchy of Jewish values, as framed in Talmud, is really perhaps more sophisticated than you might assume. Where I'd like to begin, as I did last week, is kind of with just a gentle thought exercise. Invite everyone to entertain the following scenarios without weighing in out loud. So imagine the following. Your closest friend is dating somebody new and asks you, "What do you think of my new partner?" And you have serious reservations. What do you say? Okay, that's scenario number one. Um, Here's another one, scenario number two. Someone you love has a terminal illness and is dying, and they ask you, "Is everything going to be okay?" What do you say? Okay, you don't have to answer these questions. In fact, I'm not asking you to answer the question. I'm just asking you to sit with them. Um, every person who's being honest with oneself has faced some version of the situations that I'm describing at some point in your life and perhaps found yourself uncertain. Well, what would I say? Um, what we're going to find today is that the rabbis found themselves uncertain as well. And the way they reasoned through their uncertainty, that's what we're reading today. So fair warning, their answers may surprise you. Um, the next question I want you to sit with is where in the hierarchy of Jewish values does our tradition place truth? This one you can answer out loud. Okay, Dad, you can chime in. Or were you just pointing? Yeah, your answer is like way up there. Way up there. Maybe number one. Okay. Anyone like
Yeah,
to offer?
number one is what I meant to say.
Okay. So
Jonathan,
again,
and
yes,
all I
Judy.
hear is Emmet.
Right.
Holiday, and
Of course, in the
it's
voice of the
big.
late,
It's
great
very,
Stephen
very
Merkel.
big. Yes, it's important.
Emet. Truth is very big. In fact, the rabbis themselves declare that Emet is the seal of God, the S-E-A-L, the very seal of God is Emet. That God and truth are, in a way, possibly two ways of referring to the very same thing. That which is ultimate, that which is ultimately real and true. Russell, please.
I'm sorry to get pedantic, but what exactly do you mean by truth?
Right.
We who inhabit the legal world recognize that there are such things as absolute or divine truth, but also such a thing as demonstrable truth, just as there's such things as divine justice and there's such things as rational justice. So how does our theology address those distinctions, or is there only one kind of truth?
There are absolutely more than one kind of truth, as I think that a even a cursory reading of a kind of like an amalgam of different texts will demonstrate. The truth that we're going to be talking about, I would suggest today, is a more limited lowercase t truth, where we're talking about that which appears to be factual, um, kind of like plain on its face, evident, self-evident. But we're going to talk about telling the truth, particularly in the context of relationship, right? So the two scenarios that I proposed at the outset of our lesson today, you have your best friend is dating somebody and brings that person over and then asks you for your honest opinion, and you really have concerns. What do you say? Or a loved one is dying and asks you, "Is everything going to be all right?" What do you say? And if you didn't come to an answer quickly, then perhaps you are already acknowledging that telling the truth may not always be the number one imperative in the moral hierarchy that Judaism offers us. So let's see where this leads us by looking at some text, shall we? So today's learning is going to begin as we often do with a biblical statement. So I'm going to call up on screen Exodus chapter 23, verse 7. So that's the left-hand column here that I already brought up a medieval rabbi's comment on this, but look to the left where it says the highlighted verse 7. Mi devar sheker tirchak, keep far from a false charge. But even more literally, a good rendering of this phrase would be distance yourself from a lying word or from a false word. Sheker is a lie, and devar, you probably know, is a word or a thing or a matter. So keep far from a false matter or a false word. Vinaki vitzadik al taharog, and do not bring death upon the innocent or the righteous. These are words that tend to come from a specific legal lexicon or a lexicon of jurisprudence, where the naki is a specific word referring to somebody's innocence, and a tzaddik, in this case, doesn't just mean a person who's pious. A tzaddik in a legal setting means somebody who is innocent, somebody who has been vindicated. So al taharog probably means do not cause a person who is innocent of a crime to suffer the punishment of death. So this is likely, and if you look at the larger context of the passage, you can see that the frame for Exodus 23 is a legal code. And then the last phrase, ki lo atzdik rasha, and then they turn the word tzaddik into a verb form for I, meaning God, will not vindicate or find innocent somebody who is wicked. I will not acquit the wrongdoer, which is good legal language for the translation as well. Yosef Bechor Shor is a subject of quite some interest to me. He was a late 12th century Northern French rabbi and exegete, Torah commentator, about whom I wrote extensively in my senior rabbinical thesis for Hebrew Union College. You can still look it up at the Clow Library of HUC. Joseph Bechor Shor and Christian Polemic of the High Middle Ages. It's a really breezy read. I recommend taking it with you to Aruba the next time you're traveling. It's great beach reading. So Bechor Shor is a lesser known commentator. This is how he parses the verse, and now we're looking at the right hand column that I've highlighted. Distance yourself from a false matter. Put distance between yourself and those who speak lies and gossipers. So Bechor Shor is saying not only is the testimony problematic, just steer clear of people who are known to be liars. And gossiping is a category that you should be wary of because even in a mix of possibly true statements, gossip is dangerous in part because of it's a great carrier for falsehood and exaggeration. Since on this day, since on this the text already warned, you must not carry false rumors, and it's just saying, hey, look at the bigger context of the chapter here. That's the first verse of the section we're reading. And then it says, do not bring death on those who are innocent and in the right, because liars cause the killing of the ones in the right and of the innocent. Again, he's thinking about false testimony. So
Could you
he's
go into
also
my closet and bring me my robe?
okay. We're going to mute that. He's relating this to the legal setting that I think is true to the context that of the passage we're reading. So okay, just a kind of like a broad master comment from the top from the Torah, which is useful for guiding any conversation about truth and lies, as framed in the Talmud. And I'm trying to recall now, since I prepared this lesson a number of days ago, if the Gemara that we're looking at actually makes direct reference to that verse. I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that it does. So what I'm going to do next is take us to a another biblical passage because this is the one that the Talmud is going to frame for its teaching today. So let me bring up on screen Genesis chapter 18, verses 12 and 13, or verses 11 through 13. All right, so this is of course from the latter part of the Abraham Sarah saga. This is the Annunciation scene. Uh, so the visitors to Abraham and Sarah's tent who came at the hottest time of the day and whom they welcomed with open arms, even though Abraham himself and his household are all recovering from like home performed surgery of circumcision. They receive word from these messengers who are not mere wayfarers, but rather angels, divine messengers, who say, hey, good news, you're finally going to have a baby together. Now, Ishmael has already been sired through Hagar, the Egyptian maidservant, who becomes Abraham's authorized concubine, with Sarah's blessing, which we later find out was sort of, the blessing of a desperate woman who needs to produce an heir. Once Sarah has a son of her own that she delivers, she is much less sympathetic to Hagar and Ishmael. That's chapter 21. Here we are in chapter 18. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having her period, so she's very much menopausal, postmenopausal. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Now that I've lost the ability, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?" And the word enjoyment here, edna, is a specific word that probably refers to sexual pleasure. But of course, in the larger context here, it also implies that, is she really going to, mate with her husband and actually become pregnant? So Sarah, notice, and then the final part of the sentence is the most important. With my husband so old, it's kind of a dig. I mean, it's a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black. Abraham is 100, but it's not like Sarah is 30. I mean, Sarah is 90, according to the text. So Sarah's line here is this real? Is this for real? And she's laughing, right? And so the theme of laughter, by the way, of course, becomes encoded in the text and is a folk etymology for the name that is chosen for their son, Yitzchak, which means to laugh or he will laugh. There's a lot of wordplay in this passage. I'm not going to get into a deep excursus on it, but it's fascinating if you're into that kind of thing. But notice where she places the blame. Like, forget about me. Like, I've lost the ability, but my husband is too old even to, uh, have a fun night in the sheets, right? Okay, so that's the premise here. But when God is reporting back to Abraham what's going down, listen to what happens. God said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I in truth bear a child old as I am?'" So God appears to be eliding the literal words that Sarah said with laughter in that moment, right? Sarah said, "Oh, I can't do this. And look at my husband. He like, he has got 1.5 feet in the grave. Are we really going to put a foot in the cradle?" But when God tells Abraham, he says, "Why did Sarah laugh?" You're like, come on, I'm God here. I can do anything. And besides, and the way God frames it though is Sarah in a self-deprecating way said, "I'm too old for this." Okay, now so hold that in mind with that very, and if you're not reading closely, you might even miss that. But of course, the rabbis read closely and therefore miss nothing. One I think can accurately say they read a little too much into the text sometimes, but that is the way of rabbinic reading. Okay, so now we will call up our first Gemara passage. And it's interesting. This comes from Tractate Yevamot, which is a whole Talmudic tractate dedicated to the subject of levirate marriage. Just as a quick refresher, levirate marriage is the biblical legal obligation in the case where a woman's husband dies and she is left a widow without an heir, so intestate. Um, the brother of the deceased is legally obligated to take the widow to wife in order to produce an heir, and any progeny produced through their union is considered the legal inheritance of the dead uh, guy, the older brother, presumably. And then, of course, there are all kinds of loopholes and workarounds. What if there is no brother, or what if the brother elects not to marry? There's a whole ritual. If you want to see this played out in Torah and kind of that's the substrate for this custom that is much elaborated in the Mishnah and the Talmud, read the book of Ruth, because levirate marriage is basically the premise of the coda to the book of Ruth. When Ruth finally does marry Boaz, there's a ceremony that acknowledges that the widowhood of Naomi, and it's very interesting. So there's a reference to levirate marriage. So nominally, this tractate is about levirate marriage, but of course, in the discursive and tangential way in which Talmud flows, what we're looking at today is a meaningful digression from the main subject of the text. Mom and Dad, your comment, please.
In listening audiobook style to a book on the Jewish revolution, the rebellions around, BCE 0, the Jewish wars.
Okay, which we're talking about the Jewish war against Rome.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
so
period,
68,
that period
just so
from
you get the
like,
time frame, 68 to 74, but of course,
yeah,
things
to,
were
to like
things were
150.
tense
Right.
for a long
Yeah.
time before, right? Jews
Okay.
were living
But
under Roman occupation. Okay.
it came up that one of the sons of Herod, who was supposed to be the king, did this levirate marriage thing, but apparently the woman had already had children. So that meant that this was in fact an incestuous marriage.
Interesting. Okay.
And that was, part of the
Right, because
downfall.
she is his sister-in-law.
Right. But,
Yeah.
if she doesn't have children, that's one thing. But if she's already born children, then to marry her in that circumstance is incestuous.
Yeah, there was all sorts of intrigue that was also probably political writing aimed at making illegitimate or invalidating the Herodian line. Like there's a lot of disapproval of Herod, who himself was a convert, by the way. Generally for
He was
for the
he
for,
was an Idiomaean, right?
right.
Which was a foreign tribe.
Right. So especially the more hardline sects at the time never accepted Herod as a legitimate avatar or representative of Jewish interests or Jewish peoplehood. So that's part of a bigger story there.
Right.
But I'm not specifically familiar with the alleged levirate marriage, but I'm glad you have an actual reference point to it. So now you're going to have to send me a link to the podcast.
Okay. Will do.
Okay. Audrey, unmute, please.
Okay. First of all, apparently my grandmother was I don't know, beneficiary of a levirate marriage. I was told that she was engaged to marry my grandfather's older brother, and he died during World War I of diphtheria. And so, not during the battle, but at that time. But anyway, so I think it's an
Wow.
interesting comment. But I always told my mother that there were reasons something was wrong with her. But anyway, and they were first cousins.
Uh,
So you really
yeah,
got
right. There you go.
so now you can't blame me for anything. Anyway, I want to talk in defense of Sarah because I think that interpretation is very, very unfair. Um, she was being very practical and down to earth, and her husband was no better off than she was. And maybe that annoyed God, but 90? Really? I mean, I don't think it's fair, even though I blame Sarah for all our problems with the Muslim world. Um, I think in this particular case, she's being treated unfairly.
I appreciate that. I think your voice is a welcome, not feminist, but a welcome corrective to the patriarchy that is completely encoded throughout our Hebrew scripture.
Right.
Right.
And
So,
I
yeah,
think Judaism is not good to women.
fair enough. On its face, right? I think that I think you make a very strong and courageous and necessary point for the modern reader. So thank you. Okay. So let's proceed because now we're getting to kind of like the fun stuff. So this is Gemara from Yevamot, tractate Yevamot, page 65b. And as I said, this is a kind of like a digression from the main thread about levirate marriage. And you can even see Steinsaltz sets us up to understand that when he says the Gemara cites other statements made by Rabbi, uh, what's his name here? Ilah is the way it's pronounced in Hebrew, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. In other words, so it's just acknowledging that the previous few sugyot, the previous few paragraphs, were made by this one rabbi, this Rabbi Ilah. Let's see what we know about him. I know nothing offhand, but on Safari, you just click on the name and you get a little capsule bio. So Rabbi Ilah studied under Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and had many students. Okay, he's an Amora from the third generation, somewhere in the late third, early fourth centuries. One of them, his student Ravin, took his teachings back to Babylonia with him, such that Rav Eli appears relatively frequently in the Babylonian Talmud as well as the Yerushalmi, that's the Palestinian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud. He was noted for his strict adherence to Jewish law, especially with regards to Shabbat. Okay, so he was a Shabbos observant rabbi. Okay, here's what this rabbi, again, here it says Ilah, though they're giving the transliteration of Eli, which is interesting. Here's what he said. Vamar Rabbi Ilah mishum Rabbi Elazar beRabbi Shimon. Kashem shemitzvah al ha'adam lomar davar hanishma. So this is the phrase I've just read. Just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded. So when you speak, your counsel should be calibrated in a way that it will actually be accepted and followed. Right? So this is in the theme of just how do we counsel other people? How do we give them advice? And the inverse of this, of course, what is implied in this statement is don't give advice that somebody is not going to be able to take or refuses to take. And now, of course, this is a highly pragmatic word of advice in and of itself, right? As one who dispenses advice for a living, though honestly, people think that's what they're getting when they make an appointment with the rabbi, and usually they just leave more befuddled and with more questions because like any person in the counseling professions, there's something to be said for self-help. People have to arrive at their own advice. So I can give them frameworks and deepen their interrogation, but I rarely say this is what you must do. Occasionally I do though, but only if I think they actually might heed it. Okay. They even say, listen to what Elah says here, that it's actually a mitzvah to give advice that way. right? You're commanded to. It's not just good. It's not just good practice. It's the mitzvah is give people, when you're giving advice, give advice they can actually heed. Sorry, every time I lift the cursor, it jostles the the display. Kach, so too, mitzvah al adam, it is incumbent on a person, or it's a mitzvah for a person, shelo lomar davar she'eino nishma, not to give advice that they will not heed. Okay, so like I said, the inverse is actually not only implied, I should say, it is stated. Rabbi Abba Omer, and Rabbi Abba, which I guess people thought of him as daddy, Rabbi Abba comes along and says, Chovah, it is obligatory, Shenemar, and Steinsaltz gives us the fill-in, it is obligatory for him to refrain from speaking, parenthesis, if one knows that one's advice is not going to be heeded. What's the proof text for this? Al tokach letz pen yisna eka. So this is an interesting verse from Proverbs. Hochach lechacham v'yehaveka. Very poetic line here. It's weird Hebrew. Do not reprove a scorner lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. All right, so in offering critical feedback, calibrate your language and your message so that it will actually have an effect. The last thing you want to do is give advice and have your hoped for recipient of something that is supposed to be beneficial, as advice is supposed to be, close ranks and refuse to heed it. This is a very live issue for me right now. I don't want to digress for too long, but this passage actually meant a lot to me this week. I held it up for myself in my work because you may have heard there's been this issue inflaming the Scarsdale community around vandalism in the high school that targeted a program celebrating Israel Day, Israel's Independence Day, which was yesterday, sponsored by the mostly Jewish Israel Culture Club. And it kind of blew up all over social media. And then, of course, the regular media followed, if you can call the New York Post regular media. And then it was everywhere. It's basically been just ugliness on top of ugliness. But many in our community pounced on the school board chair, whose daughter was also implicated in spreading the message on social media in a particularly vulgar way. They were calling for his resignation and much worse. I mean, really, the vitriol was just kind of like freely flowing. Some of this was we were trying to work with the Board of Ed on their messaging, and I kept saying to myself, the only advice we should be giving the Board of Ed is advice they might actually heed on how to handle this. Unfortunately, much of our advice was not taken. It should have been. The clergy advice would have helped diffuse the situation, and instead, some of the more inflamed actors decided that gasoline is a better treatment for a brush fire than water. But we can go on to that another day. Anyway, I was studying this passage alongside these events unfolding, and I kept hearing the voice of the Talmud saying, "Hey, Rabbi, only give advice that people are going to heed." Yeah, smart. These rabbis are very smart. Alan, please.
But then the onus is on the advisor on whether to predetermine whether the advice is going to be heeded or not.
Indeed. Yes, and the burden of responsibility is on the one delivering rebuke or chastisement or even just plain advice. Right. So, and again, I gave you those questions on which to marinate at the beginning of the class because this directly pertains. Somebody comes to you and you have an opinion, but you may not leap to say that new girlfriend is bad news or, you're going to die or whatever. Like you may wish to calibrate your message for a certain effectiveness, even if that is in an uncomfortable tension with the flat truth of the matter, right? That's really what we're talking about today. And that's why, in case you've lost the ways in which the dots connect here, that's the way in which the dots connect here. So let me proceed and we'll see the rabbis elaborate on this point. So that's the first piece of advice. And then again, remember, this is sort of just being set up as wise sayings by this Rabbi Ilah, Rabbi Ilah further said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. So it's the same citation thread, by the way. So he seems to be deriving his insights from a chain of tradition tracing back to Shimon. And that's important to acknowledge. It is permitted for a person to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring peace. So this is kind of a master statement. I want you to look at it in Hebrew. V'amar Rabbi Ilai Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Mutarlo, it is permitted. Notice that the language has changed somewhat in that we're no longer saying it is a mitzvah. It is an obligation or a commandment. Now they're saying it is permitted for a person, le'adam, leshanot bidevar hashalom, to modify. Leshanot literally means to change or to make something, to alter the truth of a matter, the plain truth, bidevar hashalom, in a matter or for the sake of peace. Where's the proof text? Shene'emar, and we haven't gotten to our Abraham and Sarah anecdote yet. He's now going to cite a line from Genesis from the Joseph story. Avicha tziva vagom. Okay, I'll do this in English because it's too elliptical in the Hebrew. They don't quote the full verse. So it's the very end of the book of Genesis. Jacob is now dead, and Joseph is already approaching his own death. And this is kind of like the great healing, the great teshuvah moment at the very end of the book of Genesis that kind of wraps up the family stories of the proto-Israelite people before the Exodus narrative begins. So it's the very last chapter before Exodus. And the line is brought, and I can't remember which brother says this, but your father commanded before he died, saying, so you shall say to Joseph, please pardon your brother's crime, etc. So this is part of a petition. Now that Jacob is dead, right? Think of Fredo in The Godfather, right? Michael knows that Fredo is untouchable so long as his mother is still alive. But once his mother dies, this is at the end of Godfather 2, it's open season on Fredo, and that's where the concluding scene of the movie where he takes him out in the boat, right? Sorry if you don't know the reference, but similarly, Joseph's brothers who done him dirty as a young man, even though there's been this great, come reunion and forgiveness, and Joseph has been, crying the whole time, and I forgive you, we're all together, we're a family. The brothers are still very anxious that once Jacob dies, Joseph is going to exact his revenge on the brothers who did him dirty as a young man, right? That's the context. And so the brothers petition Joseph and say, Dad said that you should forgive us before he died, when in fact there's no antecedent verse to prove that. We have no record of Jacob actually instructing Joseph or any of the sons that Joseph was to issue forgiveness and a full pardon for his brothers. But the brothers bring that, and Rabbi Ilah here says this is a great example of how the truth, it is permissible to distort the truth for the sake of shalom, for the sake of peace, right? That's the one value. So when you talk about where's truth in the Jewish moral hierarchy, yeah, right? Is it way up there? Of all of these texts assume that the reader thinks that truth is at the highest of high levels in the Jewish moral hierarchy. But then we see, well, shalom, the need for peace, also makes moral claims on us in ways that might actually cause the hierarchy to be upended. Erin Resco, please.
Can true and lasting peace really exist when it's based on a lie?
I love the question. Right, the question stands on its own as a great provocation to think more deeply about what's really going to play out here. Right? Is it real peace? Is it durable peace? If in fact it were to come to light that Jacob said no such thing to Joseph, he was under no filial obligation to his now dead father to preserve the peace in the home. Right? If that were to come to light, it would be very damaging, I think, for the relationship and the family. So thank you for helping us play that out. Arlene, please.
So I was thinking about the issues that you had raised earlier, the two of them, with a best friend dating and wondering what your response is, as well as if someone is in the process, unfortunately, of dying and turning to you. And maybe because I'm a psychologist and I've been influenced very much by what you can or cannot do under certain circumstances, I think I would probably be wanting to spend some time on why they were asking the question and what is their individual beliefs, so that I could kind of support that belief more than offering my own independent evaluation of the situation.
Nice. And very helpful to hear how a psychologist would think. By the way. Great. Audrey.
I wonder, taking the Joseph and his brother's story further, in the hopes of establishing or maintaining shalom habayit, in other words, with the home, is not saying something when you might think you want to or should, would that be considered, in other words, a white lie, a lie, or does it have to be active?
Let's hold that because I think it pertains to the second passage we're going to read as much as this one. Let's let that float in the not distant background, but kind of in the ether of our conversation. Thank you, Audrey. Okay. So I skipped a very small second example from text because the text would require too much Bible reading to even get the story. But it's the same idea that truth is modified for the sake of peace. And so now you can see that after these statements by Rabbi Ila, we have a new claimant to the same line of reasoning. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana. So it was taught, and the word for taught, Tana, directly indicates that this is Mishnaic, at least in terms of time period, though we would consider this probably a Baraita because it's not actually citing the actual Mishnah. It was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael, Gadol HaShalom. And if you want to take a great Hebrew phrase, Gadol HaShalom is one that you can just drop into a conversation the next time you're in a family argument and you want to make a plea for peace. Gadol HaShalom. Peace is big, right? But even more, how great is peace? She'af HaKadosh Baruch Hu shinabo. Even the Holy One modifies it, meaning the truth, or modifies for the sake of it. Here they say, the Holy One, blessed be He, departed from the truth for it, for the sake of peace. And what's the story they cite? Of course, it is the story we've looked at in the English now. As initially it is written that Sarah said of Abraham, my Lord is old. What an old husband I have. In the end, it is written that God told Abraham that Sarah said, and I am old. In other words, as Steinsaltz helpfully reminds us, God adjusted Sarah's words in order to spare Abraham hurt feelings that might lead Abraham and Sarah to quarrel, which is the last thing you need when you have a 90-year-old pregnant wife. Just saying. In general, easy does it. Okay? And then there's a whole lot more on this one subject, but I think we should probably, I'm seeing if there's anything else I wanted to, no, now we're back to all sorts of other matters. So I want to just kind of stay with the anecdote on Abraham and Sarah for a few moments before we look at our second Gemara text today. But this is actually the culmination of the rabbinic reasoning, beginning with Rabbi Ila and amplified in the school of Yishmael, that you may depart from peace. Sometimes peace is an even greater value than the strict telling of truth in order to preserve household harmony. And anyone who actually is part of a family structure should be wise, or would be wise, to kind of internalize this counsel. That sometimes the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is not the best tool for preserving family harmony. Right? Okay, Aaron, please.
This passage, I feel like, is less about changing the truth and more about tone and choice of words. And I think more globally, that's probably something most people can get behind, is not just saying the first thing that comes to your mind in the way that it comes to your mind, but taking a second and orienting to how I can best deliver the actual message with, but you're not actually lying.
So yes, I'm actually thinking about the sermon I delivered just this past Kol Nidre, which is on my blog. If you go to rabbiblake.org, you can find it. I spoke about truth, and big picture truth, small picture truth. That some of the lines I've even said today were in that sermon, including the seal of God is truth. And yet I tried to make the counter argument that there are all kinds of instances in which a white lie or calibrating our tone away from bluntness, away from, just flat disclosure of that which one believes or that which is empirically true is often the better way to go. I believe I said in that sermon something like, tact is just socially enforced lying. Right. So we have a whole category of social etiquette, right? That these are lubricants for meaningful, sustained relationship with other people, whether they are family or friends or just society, right? We have this whole category called tact, which is if you don't need to say something needlessly harmful, or even that if it would be socially lubricating to say something that really is not the truth at all as you see it or anyone else sees it, um, that is actually not only permissible but socially enforced. We call it tact, right? And tact is a virtue, or it's at least a social grace, that I would argue these days, when it's open season on everyone from the Pope to anyone else, like it's a virtue in short supply in our society. Maybe we could get back to that. I would say the lack of regulation on this subject in, for instance, social media, which is infecting and affecting our social discourse in real life, is something we really need to pay attention to. The toxicity of discourse, it's not just that we are swimming in a sea of lies and, fake news and specious allegations. We are also living in a time where people will say the first thing that comes to their mind that strikes them as true, heedless of the emotional impact it may have on anyone else listening to it or the subject about whom one is discussing. Right? Okay, so let's go Russell, Mom, Dad, Judy, which is the order in which your hands popped up for me.
I think Aaron raises a very important point about tact, but I think my reading of these Gemara is it's more than just packaging of the message. In my work, I advise the young people I work with that to be an effective negotiator, you have to put yourself into the mind of the other person. You have to become that person. And I think that relying on the medically impossible situation of Sarah being pregnant at the age of 90 and Abraham and the like is inviting us to think of this as something almost as magical as that, as I say, literally inserting yourself. And I believe when you do that, not only do you have the maximal tools of persuasion, but you actually learn things about yourself. It is a reverse phenomenon. I know that I have told you, Rabbi, my experience with an expert for sign language, international sign language for the deaf.
This is one of my favorites.
Who was explaining that in every system of signing known in the world, to say the future, you point in front of you, and to say the past, you point behind, except in China, where it is the opposite. To say the future, you point behind you, and to say the past, you point in front. And when I asked, well, how could that possibly be? The answer was, because you can see the past, you can't see the future. And it makes you realize that other people may think in ways that are counterintuitive, contrary, or downright wrong. But if you can somehow insert yourself into their way of thinking, again, then not only can you be persuasive, but you can discover your own biases and your own errors. And I wonder if that is what the rabbis were tilting us toward.
Beautiful. Whether they were or not, it's a beautiful spiritual prayer and imperative for our times, is it not? Right? The cultivation of empathy, which seems to be a project to which very few, at least in public life, are committed these days. So we have to do better. Thank you. Mom and Dad.
I also kind of want to applaud Erin on bringing up an issue of, she called it tact. There's probably a whole category of medical tact. And I think that, for those of us who are fans of the HBO show The Pit, in almost every scene, there is the issue of how to tell people news or the truth in a way in which they will listen, and a way in which it will not destroy them or make things worse.
Yeah, if only Dr. Rabbi could be as thoughtful and tactful with his, residents and medical students. Like many of my doctor friends have pointed out that the culture in that ER is lovely vis-a-vis the patients. It humanizes the patients, but it makes it seem as if in every emergency room in America, it is just such an abusive environment for young doctors and doctors in training, which may or may not be the case.
Hey, go take on a residency in emergency medicine. Yeah,
I've been in that room.
Or any medical residency. It's not all, gee, you're such a smart prodigy here.
I get it.
Everything wonderfully right from the start. No, that's not the way you learn medicine. But I just wanted to give a brief anecdote about telling the truth, even when you don't want to. You recall my very dear friend, Al Press, who you knew.
Sure.
Was my best
college friend who died of mesothelioma at the terrible, 41 years old?
Yes. Yeah. And I was, knowing he was having surgery at the University of Pennsylvania, I came down from my professional position in Allentown to be there for his surgery. And as it happened, I was the first person at his bedside when he opened his eyes in the recovery room. And he immediately made me have the conversation I didn't want to have. The first thing out of his mouth was, okay, what do I have?
Yeah.
And it left me with no alternative.
Yeah.
Say, and, I think the first words out of his mouth was kind of like, oh, shit, I'm not going to see my kid's bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
But, those are moments of telling the truth. And boy, it can hit like a sledgehammer.
Yeah, there are times when saying everything's going to be okay are exactly the wrong things to say. Yeah, and the hardest. Thanks, Dad. Beautiful. Judy, please.
With all of these comments about what Arlene had said as a therapist, you want to know who are you actually talking to and think of what other, and even you look into the mind of the other person. It seems as though it's possible that there's a truth on one side and there's a truth on the other side. And I think we have to consider who we're talking to. And to me, tact is a very important attribute for anyone to have. But it's also as if we are now in a contemporary therapist understanding of things. In biblical times, it was very different. I think things were.
It was, and of course, I would never inflate the rabbis so much as to call them, as good as modern therapists. I am, however, more often struck by their sensitivity, subtlety, and insight into the human psyche and the way in which that plays out in their, the way in which they encode the Jewish moral hierarchy, the Jewish way, both halakha and aggadot. I think a lot of these stories point to conclusions that are, in fact, centuries later, reinforced by the norms and practices of modern psychology.
And that's
I often find, I often say to congregants who are basically trying to find the words to say the same thing, yeah, Judaism is really good at death, isn't it? Like the way in which Judaism invites us to encounter the hard stuff in life is often where I find Judaism to be the most astute in understanding the human psyche and the best way to help a person prepare to let go of a loved one or to die oneself, to grieve and to heal and to re-enter relationship and society. Like that's one small example of many, 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 many. But yeah, this was not coming from that framework. That time or place will be anachronistic to superimpose our modern psychological insights from modern psychology onto the way in which the text is written. Having said that, I guess you could say Talmud is often ahead of its time.
Also, that's why we are still struggling and getting so much from studying Torah. And it's a
Amen.
living,
Amen.
it
Amen.
is a living concept. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When people actually do this and realize this is not some dusty tome of arcana, but rather deeply relevant to the lived experience, not just for Jews, like what we're studying today is of course deeply Jewish, but it is also mostly human. And we're going to have fun with the next text. So I want to get to that after Linda's comment. Thank you, Judy. Linda, you're on.
All right, with respect to what Russell said, I think there is no such thing as absolute truth. You know, the future could be this way and that way. And we're in our society, we're sort of taught but it's this way, not that way. And we would have much better understanding of people if we made it and instead of but for the truth. You know, for the truth could be both things can be true.
Thank you. I think, well, in the next text, you're certainly going to be finding yourself sympathetic to the Hillel argument contra Shammai, as usual. And also, I want to submit that just because if one subscribes to what Linda just proposed, that does not make one a moral relativist, right? It is often, I think, um, it- the claim that so-called truth may make on our lives is sometimes exaggerated to a point where it eclipses other virtues that also should make claims on our lives and our conduct. And that's where we're heading here. So why don't we look at it together? All right. So this is a whole new tractate of Talmud. In fact, I have Steinsaltz open next to me in the beautiful Koren Talmud Bavli. So I've been looking sidelong at tractate Yevamot, and now I have another book in front of me, which is tractate Ketubot. It's from the same order of Talmud. Remember that the Talmud framed in the architecture of the Mishnah is comprised of 6 orders. So there's a whole order called Nashim, which means women issues. And again, that too implies the patriarchal orientation of the rabbinic literature and the community of the Jewish people at the time in which this literature was produced. Nevertheless, the fact that an entire order of Talmud with all of the tractates in that order, basically talking about here's how we deal with women, it suggests that it was of serious concern to regulate um, gender politics and marriage politics and all of the other institutions pertaining to how men, again, the subject of address in all of these texts, would in fact relate ethically and legally Jewishly, that is halachically, to women. So Ketubot is all about marriage contracts. As you know, a ketubah is a writ of marriage. But again, in the discursive way of Gemara, we're going to see several aggadot or several passages that aren't about how to write a ketubah, but they are very much about the interplay of marriage and specifically proper conduct at weddings. So this will leaven a little bit the conversation. I think that one should have a rich appreciation for the rabbinic capacity for comedy. So there's a little bit of comedy to I think leaven the learning here. All right, so here we are in Ketubot 17a. And we begin, I'll just give a little bit of the Hebrew. Kala kamot shehi. And again, you have to like know the context here, but literally it just means a bride as she is. Well, what does that mean? Steinsaltz is going to give us the context. One recites praise of the bride as she is, and then he says, well, emphasize her good qualities. So there is a larger premise here of etiquette at a wedding. And it is considered proper etiquette at a Jewish wedding to indulge the bride in praise. It's part of the larger ethos of creating a wedding that is joyful, right? So joy at a wedding is not actually discretionary, it is mandatory. There's even a medieval custom that some of my friends have taken upon themselves of asking a friend to serve at the wedding as one's badchan, which literally means a jester. The badchan is like a court jester, a person whose official task is to keep people happy at a wedding. And I wish more people would employ badchanim because most weddings for the guests are not the funnest things in the world. Just saying. I speak as one who's been to a few hundred of these things. Sometimes they're just total bangers and they're a blast. More often, it is a dry recitation of platitudes and generalities with mediocre food and music that is much too loud. Well, you can quote me on that. Someday I'm going to write a book called How Not to Throw Your Wedding. But that's a different sermon for a different Shabbos. Okay, so we're talking about wedding etiquette and keeping the bride happy, because the bride is indeed the center of attention at a wedding, is very important. And there is a long-standing Jewish norm or custom of giving praise to the bride. So this is an obligation upon the guests at a wedding to praise the bride. And now we're going to get into a debate around, well, you'll see. What if the bride is ugly? That actually is the subject of our discourse. Again, if you are a little bit revolted by the sexist assumptions that underpin this text, fine, I share those discomforts, but I also think that the rabbis had a capacity for comedy. And if all things are off limits, nobody ever laughs and there's no such thing as comedy anymore. And by the way, I say this with a great deal of eagerness and excitement that I'm seeing Modi at Radio City Music Hall tonight with a bunch of friends. If you don't know Modi, look him up, M-O-D-I. He's a hilarious Jewish comedian, and it's going to be a great show. So I think that it is deeply Jewish to have a rich appreciation for comedy, which means that not everything is taboo to talk about, even ugly brides. All right, so that's where we are. Let's bring the text back on screen. So there's this ethos that if you're going to praise a bride, you should praise her for the qualities that she has. And obviously what's at stake here is truth, right? How much are you willing to either suspend speaking the truth or outright distort or lie in order to fulfill the other mitzvah on the scale of what matters at weddings of making the bride happy? Like, are you going to say to an objectively ugly bride, again, physically, God, you're beautiful today, right? And that's the debate. All right, one recites a fair and attractive bride. Like, you're supposed to say, gosh, you look pretty. And Beit Shammai, always, I think, on the wrong side, or usually on the wrong side of Jewish practice, he says to Beit Hillel, the rival academy, in a case where the bride was lame or blind, and again, okay, like, let's just fair disclosure, these are really inappropriate categories for evaluating a person's worth, right? And one's beauty. But I think that, who was it earlier that said we should not, Judy, who said we should not be superimposing our modern perspectives wholesale on this text, right? So for somebody to be lame or blind or to have any other defect or deformity, as was understood at the time, fair game. So Shammai is basically asking, are we really going to say you look so beautiful if objectively you don't? What does one say with regard to her? A fair and attractive bride? But the Torah states here, oh, finally, there's the quote I was waiting for, where we began today. But the Torah outright says, keep you from a false matter. Don't lie, right? Don't, like, and not just don't lie. Steer clear of it. Like, steer clear of anyone who speaks untruth. Beit Hillel's response to Beit Shammai, according to your statement with regard to one who acquired, so Hillel's going to give an example that kind of spoils Shammai's argument. According to your statement, with regard to one who acquired an inferior acquisition from the market, should another praise it and enhance its value in his eyes, or condemn it and diminish its value in his eyes? You must say that he should praise it. So somebody comes back from a trip to, Turkey and thinks that they bought a treasure in the bazaar, right, in Istanbul, and is showing it off like, look at this amazing, inlaid wood, marble, whatever. And you know that it's dreck, right? But this person is so enamored with the treasure he bought. Like, are you really going to say, buddy, that's dreck? You can't tell? Hillel is saying, no, you praise it and say, oh, yes, well, a beautiful artifact, I'm sure, what a beautiful souvenir. Or you don't say much. You just say, oh, I can see how much pleasure this gives you. You find a way not to say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which is, buddy, you bought dreck. Right? That's what Hillel's driving at here. And again, if you are made uncomfortable by the analogy, by the comparison of a bride to a drecky, acquisition, fine. Like me too, right? But again, let's read this for comedy, not quite so seriously. You must say that he should praise it and enhance its value in his eyes and refrain from causing him anguish, which is what Steinsaltz is getting at. Think of the psychology. Think of how your comment is going to land. And from here, the sages said, a person's disposition should always be empathetic with mankind or humankind and treat everyone courteously. In other words, there are certain social graces which are more than just etiquette, right? So in the moral hierarchy of what does it mean to live Jewishly, truth is way up there, of course, but not at the expense of those virtues which make society function harmoniously. And in this case, Steinsaltz helps us with the conclusion. In this case, too, once the groom has married his bride, one praises her as being fair and attractive. And this is important because what Steinsaltz believes is that she is. She is. And how many of you, how many of us, I know the answer is everyone, by the way, have changed your views about the physical attractiveness of another person once you got to know them? Yeah, that would be all of us, right? Somebody that you are just absolutely gobsmacked. Oh my God, he is the most beautiful, the most handsome. I am like smitten. Oh my God. Then you get to know them. Oh my God. So vacuous, so vain, so ugly on the inside. And then all of a sudden, your body, your brain, but your body like recalibrates the way it reacts to that person, right? And all of a sudden, instead of feeling stimulated and aroused in a positive way, you're looking at another person who may previously you thought was objectively beautiful or good looking, and then all of a sudden you only see the ugliness, right? So there is something to be said for the subjectivity of beauty as well. And therefore, really, it's unfair to apply to these scenarios the idea of strict truth, because when it comes to another person's beauty, there is no such thing as universally objective truth. Now, I can say all that, and yet there are some people who are never going to get a modeling contract. And there are other people who it's quite obvious why they've succeeded in image conscious fields. Like, okay, right? So there's some people just objectively, most people agree, are like very beautiful or striking. So, and again, even then, you're talking with your friends and somebody will say, man, I don't find them attractive at all. And I'll be like, really? You don't? But okay, so you can see that there's a huge variation in what people find to be attractive. More to the point, elsewhere in the Talmud, I'm not sure I don't think it's in this passage. There's a line that summarizes all of this that says, on her wedding day, every bride is beautiful. It's quite a important statement in Jewish thought. Okay, Joe, please. Unmute yourself kindly. There we go.
Recently, I think it was on my iPhone. I get all these blots or blogs or vlogs, whatever you call them. I recently, I don't remember where or who, it was advice on how to compliment people, especially a younger relative or someone who's done something very good. And most people would say, I'm very proud of you. The suggestion was instead of that, where the person you're saying it to, will want to make you proud in order to do things right. Instead of saying, I'm proud of you, say, you can be proud of yourself, so that the person will assume his own, raison d'etre, if not. Now, it brings me back to what you said about the gift from Turkey. Instead of having to say, "Oh yes, that's beautiful," you could always say something like, "I hope you enjoy it,"
Yeah,
or "I
right.
know you're going to enjoy it."
Yeah. There is an art, a diplomatic art to becoming adept with tact. I've I've endeavored in this field for a very long time, and I've learned, usually by screwing up, how not to say something. Most people think that, being a rabbi is mostly, mastering the art of what to say. It's precisely the opposite. It's mastering the knowledge of what not to say. Okay. And even then, it's always a struggle. And generally I have found in life that I have many more regrets over the things I said that I did not have to than the things I chose not to say.
The other day about your son.
Yeah. Okay.
You should be
Audrey,
proud. You should be proud of yourself, Jonathan.
thank you. Well, I know, we all, if we care, we toil at this, but it's not intuitive for human beings. And again, I have become increasingly not just vexed, but deeply concerned at the deepest, like Jewish levels. My neshama is actually very much worked up about the way in which social media, particularly, has absolutely eviscerated this discipline, and has even, negated the interest of society in cultivating it. Now, that's again, perhaps a sermon for a different Shabbos, but if we aren't looking for the points of connection between Gemara and our lives, why bother? All right, Audrey, please, and then we'll do the follow-up parts of the text were actually even more fun than talking about ugly brides. Okay, Audrey, please.
Just wanted to say that basically this ties in very closely to last week's study of verbal mistreatment.
Exactly, right? So that's why we organize the syllabus in this way, that some themes are recursive. Next week will feel less connected. But at the end of the day, I was hoping that we would have 7 weeks together during the Omer, that beautiful bridge that we build from liberation at Pesach to receiving Torah at Sinai on Shavuot, where we can come to the mountain on Shavuot and say, okay, my Torah has grown. And not just my learned Torah, but my lived Torah, right? I'm really interested in literature from the Jewish tradition that helps us live richer, deeper, wiser, happier Jewish lives. Okay, so let's see. None of what comes next may make you richer, deeper, wiser, but here it is anyway. It's pretty fun, though. So this is a passage where we're going to learn an Aramaic phrase that probably will never come in handy for you. But ki ata Rav Dimi, so when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, we get Steinsaltz helping us with where's he coming from, where's he going to. Amar, he said, all right, so this is the phrase. Hachi misharu kame kalta b'marva. Okay, so I've switched to Aramaic, which I don't read as well as Hebrew, not even close. But he says, this is the formula. This is what they sing before brides in the West, in Eretz Yisrael. So he seems to be reporting. So this is just a very interesting bit of kind of like Talmudic journalism, where this rabbi from Eretz Yisrael comes to Babylonia. Remember, that's where they're writing the Talmud. So he's a guest in what is now the predominant, largest, most flourishing Jewish civilization in the world, in Babylonia. But he has the emes, he has the way in which it's done in the old country, which is Eretz Yisrael. He says there's actually a formula that you're supposed to recite at weddings. And it's an Aramaic formula, which would have been the vernacular of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael at the time. And I love this. So this is the Aramaic phrase you're going to learn with me. Lo chachol, which, by the way, means no eyeshadow, or no eyeliner. Chachol, or kachol, is kohl, Kohl, right? So that's a biblical word. If you want to know where kohl comes from, there it is, kachol, right? Lo kachol, velo sarak, no rouge, velo pirkus, and no hair braids, v'yalatchen, and yet as graceful as an ibex. Okay, now again, I haven't had any success picking up the ladies by comparing them to livestock or wild animals. It doesn't play, but the Hebrew word is the Ya'el, by the way, which is a common name in Judaism and in Jewish culture and in Israel today. A Ya'el is an ibex, a very beautiful. If you've ever seen one in the wild, by the way, it's a gorgeous animal. Again, not sure it plays on JDate, but like don't try this at home if you're in the market. There are other lines from biblical love poetry that one should also not try on your paramour or hoped for paramour, such as your hair or your teeth are like a flock of goats and not one of them is missing. Like that's just not, I mean, it probably was considered very, sensual and erotic and a beautiful compliment in its time. I don't think it works today. Anyway, okay, so this is what you're supposed to say to a bride. Even without makeup and hair, she's as beautiful as as nature made her. Well, that's a beautiful little formula, and let's just assume that it actually was intended and received to be complimentary. And then the Gemara goes on from there. I'll frame this for us as a here we go. The Gemara goes on to say, when the sages ordained Rabbi Zira, this is what they metaphorically sang with regard to him. So this was such a popular formula of praise that when this great rabbi was ordained, obviously not a bride, not a woman at all, but they said same thing. No makeup or hair, and God, he's gorgeous, right? Okay, but again, now it's being used allegorically. It's not just his physical qualities. We're going to skip a little bit. And this one's really fun. So a few paragraphs down. With regard to the mitzvah of bringing joy to the bride and groom, just so Steinsaltz reminds us, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about that. The Gemara relates that the sages said about Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli that he would take a myrtle branch and dance before the bride. So he would, and myrtle branches are very leafy, right? So he'd have like these fronds, and I once went to a wedding in Miami for members who are still members of the congregation today. They were children of members, so there's 3 generations of this one household growing up at WRT. It was one of the few times I got to co-officiate with Rick Jacobs and stay at the party with Rick there. And Rick, Rick and I usually we go to cocktails and then we're like, it's been lovely to share this simcha with you, but go home to our families and our lives. But because it was a destination wedding in Miami, we stayed for the party. And it was the one and only time I actually saw Rick get out on the dance floor. And all I can say is that he was every bit the trained modern dancer that Rick was on the dance floor. It was a very and I thought about this passage with the rabbi and his myrtle fronds bringing joy to the bride with his crazy myrtle branch dance. Okay, so that's an image for you. It's a true to life one. Okay, and with these myrtle branches, this rabbi would be doing his whole big dance shtick, and he would say, "A fair and attractive bride. What a beautiful bride." And then apparently this trend caught on because now you have Rab Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. He would base his dance on 3 myrtle branches that he would juggle. Right. So then the next guy comes out with the myrtle branches and he's out on the dance floor doing this. And Rabbi Zeira, the same one whom they praised, by the way, as no makeup, no hair, and yet he's still gorgeous, he said, "Ugh, this old man is humiliating us." And Steinsaltz helps us as through his conduct, he is demeaning the Torah and the Torah scholars. He's out there on the dance floor making a fool of himself and giving a bad name to rabbis, right? A rabbi should be a serious man. A rabbi should be a dignified scholar, and this is totally undignified. Okay, where's all of this going and how does it connect? Let's read and find out. When Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak died, a pillar of fire demarcated between him and everyone else. So he had this miraculous thing. So this is the same rabbi who got out there on the dance floor with the myrtle twigs and did like his crazy dance in the interest of praising the bride and making the bride happy at her wedding. Okay, so that's the story. Another rabbi said, yuck, this is undignified, this is unseemly behavior, this is behavior unbecoming a man of Torah. But when the myrtle dance rabbi died, there was this miracle of a pillar of fire being like set up where he was as if to demarcate holy space. And that's what the rabbis are, what this legend is about. So some crazy miraculous thing happened. And we learn through tradition, where do we get it? It's a tradition that a pillar of fire demarcates only for either one person in a generation or maybe two people in a generation. And Ze'ira goes on actually, and this is, remember, this is the rabbi who was saying this cutting thing, like, ugh, what an undignified thing. He actually says his branch, and that's a reference to the myrtle branch, but it may mean more than that metaphorically, was effective for the old man. As Steinsaltz helps us, it is due to this mitzvah that he fulfilled so enthusiastically that he was privileged to receive this great divine recognition of his merit, right? Only one or two in a generation get the fire trick when they die. And the reason they use the word branch is because there's a pun here in the second part of the comment. And some say that Ze'ira said, same guy said, his nonsense, not his branch, but there's a word that sounds like the word shotite, which means branch, and shitute, which means ridiculousness, nonsense, was effective for the old man. And some say, another wordplay here, we should read his method, shitate, was effective for the old man. The bigger point is that what is the actual mitzvah of showing up at a wedding, right? And so in this case, the rabbis would say, suspend decorum if it brings joy to the bride. Suspend your normal attitude of, I'm a serious Torah scholar, if you have a method that will fulfill the higher principle of making someone happy on their wedding day. And that's why even with the comedy of this passage, which I would register and submit as intentional, I think that this is written to elicit, to get a little bit of a rise out of the reader. Who knows if these stories actually happen? That's really not the point. The point is that the rabbis are admitting to meaningful challenges to the presumed moral hierarchy of Jewish life, and that there are times in which even the dignity of a Torah scholar can be cast aside when the moment calls for it. Right. So with all of that in mind, and then we'll leave this open for a little bit of question. Because I think it's important to emphasize where we've arrived here. At the end of the day, this turnaround on the part of Rabbi Ze'ira, right? He's the one who at first was so turned off by watching this dignified scholar get out there on the dance floor and make a fool of himself. And that's why I related the story about Rick Jacobs. I was watching him doing his dance, and I was like, "Oh, that's a dance." And this passage helped me rethink that moment. At the end of the day, what is the greatest merit that the Talmud itself ascribes to Rabbi Zera? Why did he get this divine recognition of fire around his resting place when he died? The answer is not his legal rulings, not his scholarship. It was the thing that the Talmud itself acknowledges befitted this old man the most. So this is where Ze'ira recognizes that, I'm sorry, we're talking about the other rabbi, the one who did the little dance. He realizes he's wrong. He says, no, what actually provides divine merit for this Torah scholar is exactly that he cast aside his dignity to inhabit a higher precept, which was to make a bride happy at her wedding day. It's really, I think, an astonishing claim that um, this is behavior that's not merely permitted, but in a way holy. Um, so at the end of the day, it was Rabbi Samuel Shmuel who, you know, allegedly humiliated himself on the dance floor at that wedding, and then who was vindicated in his eulogy by Rabbi Zera, who basically is offering a posthumous word of praise for what he learned from this. What he learned from this is that sometimes being a rabbi is about more than teaching Torah. Sometimes being a Jew is about more than living the strict letter of the law. It's about bringing joy to other people. And as we learned throughout our study today, sometimes that even means putting truth on the back burner if you can bring a greater measure of joy and shalom into the world. That seems to me like a really rich precept for us to sit with. So now we've reached the end of my prepared study. There's more that we could have learned. I brought Bava Metzia 65b, but it's so tangly, and I don't think it substantially adds. I'll just kind of note here that if you are a glutton for this stuff, if you go to where is it? Hang on, it's in my notes. One moment. Did it fail to print? Might have failed to print. There's a section uh in Bava Metzia, I think 65b, that talks about, or maybe it's 23b, doesn't matter, that talks about other cases in which truth can be set aside in order to live a higher precept, at least in that specific instance. I'll see if I can find that for next time. It's interesting, but not worth a deep dive. Alan, please.
You talk about putting truth on the back burner, but there has to be moderation because with my mazel, if I complimented someone on his Turkish chazarai, he would say, well, I bought a half a dozen. Here's one for you. And then I'd have to put it out every time he was going to visit my home. I'd have to put it out. It's terrible.
These are the words of a seasoned traveler among the Jewish people. Yep. That's, I mean, honestly, it's so funny. People often praise me for having a very kind of like Zen clean office, but what they don't know is what's in these cabinets. And if I were to show you the amount of accumulated chazarai from people who think that somehow the rabbi of all the people in the Jewish community needs another menorah or Shabbos candlestick. Really, people. I don't need your gifts, by the way. If you want to express appreciation, give to the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund or our annual campaign, Inspired Giving. And we're going to have a big endowment campaign that we're launching. Support the temple. But if you do ever feel moved to give me a gift, please make sure that it's something I can consume or that takes up no physical space, right? Okay. But yeah, seriously, Alan, I so relate to what you just said. Never compliment another person's chazarai because then you'll end up with 6 of them. Yep. Those closets attest to the truth of your comment. Okay, others, I love that.
I
Yeah, please.
I also remember early on when we first went to Israel, Ivan and I, we came back with these lovely ancient amphoras that they were selling. And quite a bit later, I was looking, this is not a truly ancient. This is definitely a reproduction, but it's so that was done by the Israelis too, not only in Turkey, it was in Israel as well.
Thank you. I love that. That is well taken. Yes.
Tune in Antiques Roadshow any day, any week at all. And among the very valuable things, you will find lots of, tchotchkes, things that came back from Turkey.
Oh, I found my notes here, so I'll just share this. This is so what I highlighted from Bava Metzia 23b are 5 examples that the rabbis give of when one can set aside truth for a higher purpose. Oh, see, I'm so ahead of the game. I set up my tabs when I do my lesson planning, and then so many things happened this week that I kind of forgot what I already did. I'll just show you I'll show you what I called up. So I can just show you without going into a huge deep dive. So this is Bava Metzia 23b. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says. All right, so this is the citation. With regard to these three matters alone, it is normal for sages to amend their statements and deviate from the strict truth. With regard to a tractate, and Steinsaltz helps us, if he is asked whether he studied a particular tractate, he may humbly say that he did not, even if he did. The inverse, or the opposite is not true. The converse is not true. I can't claim to have studied something I didn't, but I can, for the sake of humility, not to come across as boastful, I can downplay as a scholar my own learning. It's really interesting. So humility is has a certain premium, right? It's worth a lot in the moral hierarchy of Judaism. And so if it means that you can downplay your own scholarship for the sake of humility, you should. All right, the second, and with regard to a bed, so this is intimate matters. If he is asked whether he slept in a particular bed, he may say that he did not to avoid shame in case some unseemly residue is found on the bed. And the third one, which goes on to the next page, and he can lie with regard to a host, as one may say that he was not well received by a certain host to prevent everyone from taking advantage of the host's hospitality. Which is interesting. I would have thought it went the other way around, right? But you can actually say, like, I do this all the time. How was that restaurant that you tried? I might say, if I don't want everyone in Scarsdale to go to that restaurant so that I can have a dinner in peace. I guess the rabbis are legitimating that kind of lying. But again, none of I don't think the rabbis would make such, strenuous efforts to provide cases where the truth can be subverted, modified, altered, if it weren't understood to be a primary value in Judaism. But I hope what we've taken away from today is that just because truth is a primary value in Judaism does not mean that our tradition is, unsophisticated so as not to incorporate the ways in which other values make claims on our Jewish lives. So with that, my friends, I hope you have a lovely spring day and week. I'm going to take in some great Jewish comedy tonight and hopefully have some good stories to share next week. We do return next Thursday on the last day of April for more study as we continue our exploration of these treasures of Talmud. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.